Good afternoon, church. It is good to be back with you this afternoon. The night I have told you was coming has come. This will be the last character study for at least a while. Okay? We're going on vacation, my family and I, next week, so you have a break from us, from me completely. And then the following week, gonna probably do some other things. We may come back. It seems to have been well received, and I understand its profitability. It helps us to understand our faith and the struggles that we go through when we look at the characters in the Bible and their faith and the struggles they went through. So I get it. But we conclude for now our Footprints of Faith preaching series by considering Deborah, the prophetess. We're going to talk about her in the way that we typically do. We're going to talk about who she was. We're going to talk about what she did. And then we're going to talk about what we can learn. So let us begin. Who was she? Not a lot said about her. There's only one other character, Deborah, in the Bible. The Deborah we're talking about tonight is not that Deborah who was a maid of Rachel, the wife of Jacob, who was buried in Bethel and mentioned in Genesis chapter 35 and verse 8. This Deborah is a different Deborah, and her name is mentioned only 9 times in the Bible, and all of that in Judges chapter 4 and chapter 5. It's the only place we'll find information on her. So if you want to go ahead and turn to Judges chapter 4, and as you know probably, chapter 5 is the song, so pretty much chapter 4, the information we have about Deborah. But we read, especially in verse 4, that Deborah was a prophetess, the wife of Lapidoth, was judging Israel at that time. So, who was she? Her name was Deborah. Her name, Deborah, means bee, B-E-E, as in the little insect. Some commentators say that they don't think it means like the insect necessarily, but the mode of movement of a bee, not like shaking and jerking like that, but motion with a purpose is, I think, what Strong had in his definition of Deborah. So bee. I think bee is more significant when you look at the big picture of the ultimate lesson, Deborah. We'll talk about that more later. She was the wife of Lapidoth, which means in Hebrew torches or lamp. It is the only man with that name in the Bible, so there it is. But again, when you think about Deborah as a judge, as a prophetess, and her husband's name is torches or lamp, because the interesting aspect of the names in the Bible, what is God's word? It is a lamp unto my feet. I don't know. I find it interesting. Who else was she? She was a prophetess. And what does that mean? Well, I talked to the class this morning, the Bible class, and you've got the 2 groups that you should always keep in mind. You've got priests and you have prophets. Now, priests represent the people to God. And prophets and prophetesses represent God to the people. You see the 2 different directions. The priests represent the people to God. The prophets represent God to the people in their word. That's why Jesus was so very special, because he was prophet, priest, and king. So she was a prophetess, which means she would speak inspired of God. And people would come to her to hear her words. And not just that, she was judging Israel at that time. Notice that's what it said in verse 4. She was judging Israel at that time. And she would sit under the palm tree of Deborah between Ramah and Bethel in the mountains of Ephraim. And the children of Israel came up to her for judgment. So what does it mean to be a judge? You'll notice I've got it capitalized there because that's a special kind of judge. Well, a judge was a temporary leader that God put into place to deliver his people during that terrible time that we call the period of Judges. Okay? We went from having Moses as the leader of God's people, bringing them out of Egypt, to Joshua being the leader of the Lord's people, taking them into the promised land, to then everybody went off to their possession. And what's that constant refrain in Judges? Do you remember? And every man did what was right in his own eyes. There was no king in Israel in those days. And so what happened is, because of their disobedience to God, they did not fully remove the Canaanite people. What he said would happen, happened. They became a thorn in their eyes, a constant stumbling block. So this period of Judges is, there is an oppression that moves in, usually from a foreigner, comes in, and then God instills a judge, raises one up who leads Israel's people and delivers them from that persecution. Sadly, it's that cycle, right? The people turn away from God. Things start going downhill. They have an oppressor come in who takes over and causes big problems for them. They cry out to God. He gives them a judge. He delivers them. They are free from that oppression, and they turn away from God, and that cycle is repeated. Unfortunately, in this book of Judges, if you take the time to study it, it's not a circle. It's a downward spiral because it gets progressively worse as it goes along. But Deborah is the judge. Okay? She follows in order Shamgar, though it does mention Ehud dying as being when she took over or she came into prominence. Another thing to remember about the judges is it doesn't appear to have been a national thing because there doesn't really appear to be a national Israel. You've got areas, you've got the tribal allotments, and then you've got problems that arise in certain areas. Like when we talk about Deborah and what she did as a judge, you're not going to hear anything about Judah. Well, why? Judah is like the dominant tribe because this is in a northern area, or an area just north of Judah. So these judges did their work in certain localities. Now, some, when we get toward the end, right, all the tribes came together to fight that civil war against Benjamin, but in general, seems to be fairly local. Okay? So that's who she was. What did she do? Well, I just read it. She dwelt under the palm tree of Deborah between Ramah and Bethel. And you wonder, how did she find out that there was a palm tree named, you get it, Deborah? Well, obviously that was a name given after the fact. She sat under a palm tree between Ramah and Bethel in the mountains of Ephraim. Got a lot of maps for you tonight because not a lot of information, so I thought this would help to be able to understand what we're talking about. See, these are the numbers of the judges in order, and there's Bethel. They don't really know where Ramah is. They think it was just south of here, so that's probably where she was, right in that area, okay? And she sat there under a tree, and it said, in the mountains of Ephraim. Israel has some of the most interesting topography, or geography. You see here, Bethel is probably right about here in these mountains. Remember, it said the mountains of Ephraim. Remember, Israel is divided up into three main areas. You have the coastal plain, you have this in-between area called the Shephelah, and then you have the mountain range, okay? Mountain ranges on both sides, and then that Jordanian rift, or the Levant, that goes from all the way up here, all the way down into Malawi in Africa. One of the greatest fissures, one of the most unique features on our planet happens to be right there. So she was in these mountains under that tree. And what did she do? Well, we read that she commanded Barak to prepare himself to fight against King Jabin of Hazor and against his commander Sisera, okay, who had 900 iron chariots, right? I find these things interesting. I love when the Bible is specific and when it is general, because the Bible is often accused of being to exaggerate numbers, okay? And if just man was writing a Bible, and this guy had a lot of these chariots, are you going to say he had 900 of them? No, of course not. You're going to say he had 1,000 of them. So very specific, and I appreciate that. The iron chariots of Sisera under King Jabin. Interesting thing, hold your place there. Turn back to Joshua chapter 11 and verse 1. When Joshua was going through and conquering Canaan, look who he ran into in the northern conquest. And it came to pass when Jabin, king of Hazor, heard these things, that he sent to Jabab, king of Madon, and to the king of Shimron, to the king of Akshaph. Okay, how is this possible? Well, this is not the same Jabin. This is roughly 100 years later that we're talking about, and it's just that name which becomes a title, like when we talked about Ben-Hadad of Syria, right? Ben-Hadad just means son of Hadad, which was a god, a false god, and it appears to have become just a name of the king of Syria. If my name was Fred and I became the king of Syria, my name would become Ben-Hadad. We talked about Candace, right? With the Ethiopian eunuch. He worked for Candace. And that's not a name of a lady, that's the name, the title of the queen of Ethiopia at that time. So that appears to be the same issue here with Jabin. So she has told Barak, called him to her, to prepare himself to deliver Israel. For 20 years, Jabin has been oppressing this part of Israel. Okay? We learn that Barak is from Kadesh, Naphtali, which is way up here. Some think it may be down here, but these folks thought it was up here. Okay? That's where they think. She's down here in Bethel. She calls for him to come and to prepare himself, and he's supposed to take 10,000 troops from Naphtali and from Zebulun and to prepare and come to Mount Tabor in order to fight against, see Hazor there? That's where Jabin's headquarters is. Now, his general, Sisera, is from, let me find the place again. Oh, it's right there, sorry. Harosheth Hagoyim. They have no idea all they know what that means is when you translate it, it means Harosheth, which is like wooded area, and Hagoyim means of the Gentiles. So a wooded area of the Gentiles. So, or maybe we're talking about up here toward Lebanon, and Gentiles, would you call Tyre Gentiles or Tyre Gentiles because they're not Israelites? I don't know. But again, look here. What made Sisera and thus Jabin so formidable? 900 iron chariots, right? So Deborah told Barak to go up, bring his forces down to Mount Tabor. See it right there? And it's right next to the valley of Jezreel. Well, what was special about the valley of Jezreel that makes it such a famous name? Well, if you wanted to get into a really big fight, it's about the only place you could do it. See, it's about the only truly flat area, other than the coastal plain, that you could engage in a big battle. Right here, it's not mentioned, but right here there is a certain city you probably have heard of called Megiddo, right? Armageddon comes from that word because it was a famous fort that looked over the valley of Jezreel where fighting could occur. So God said to Deborah, who said to Barak, you come to this mountain area of Tabor, and God said, I will bring Sisera and his army to you. Because if Sisera wants to fight somebody, where's he going to want to go with 900 chariots? They want to go in this plain, right? So God is setting it up so that Barak has 10,000 soldiers here, and then all those chariots are going to hear, and he's going to be able to flow down onto them. Let's keep reading. Verse 6 of Judges 4. Then she sent and called for Barak, the son of Abinoam, from Kadesh in Naphtali, and said to him, Has not the Lord God of Israel commanded, Go and deploy troops at Mount Tabor? Take with you 10,000 men of the sons of Naphtali and of the sons of Zebulun. And against you, notice God is saying, I will deploy Sisera, the commander of Jabin's army, with his chariots and his multitude at the river Kishon. And I will deliver him into your hand. I know there's a question mark because she was saying, hasn't God told you this? You should be doing it. Just an FYI, this is the river Kishon right here. I have actually a close-up for you. This is the river Kishon. There's the valley of Jezreel, and there's Tabor, where this battle is going to begin. Verse 8, And Barak said to her, If you will go with me, then I will go. But if you will not go with me, I will not go. So she said, I will surely go with you. Nevertheless, there will be no glory for you in the journey you are taking, for the Lord will sell Sisera into the hand of a woman. Then Deborah arose and went with Barak to Kadesh, and Barak called Zebulun and Naphtali to Kadesh. He went up with 10,000 men under his command, and Deborah went up with him. So do you see what he did? He met with her here. She said, you know what you're supposed to do. She traveled with him all the way up here to Kadesh, and then they assembled their troops and came to Tabor ready for the battle. So, what else did she do? Well, we just talked about it. She told Barak that because of his lack of faith, his weakness, his request that she come with him, it's not really a request, was it? It was more a, I'm not going unless you go with me. She says, because you did that, the true honor and glory from this battle, the one who's going to defeat Sisera, is not going to be you. It's going to be a woman. And we see that just as she said, that's what happened. You remember the story. Israel engaged the armies of Jabin under Commander Sisera. And with God's assistance, they destroyed them utterly. The text says not a man escaped. But in the midst of that battle, Sisera jumped off of his chariot and ran to hide. And he came to a house. And in that house was a woman. And the man who owned that house, her husband, was maybe not friendly, but had an understanding with Jabin. So Sisera would have been somewhat comfortable because, well, let's go ahead and read the text so you can hear the words. Now Heber the Kenite, verse 11 of chapter 4, of the children of Hobab, the father-in-law of Moses, had separated himself from the Kenites and pitched his tent near the tabernacle tree of Zaanannim, which is beside Kadesh. And they reported to Sisera that Barak, the son of Abinoam, had gone up to Mount Tabor. So Sisera gathered his materials up. Verse 17. However, Sisera had fled away on foot to the tent of Jael, the wife of Heber the Kenite, for there was peace between Jabin, king of Hazor, and the house of Heber the Kenite. And Jael went out to meet Sisera and said to him, Turn aside, my lord. Turn aside to me. Do not fear. And when he had turned aside with her into the tent, she covered him with a blanket. He is exhausted. He is tired. He is afraid. She covers him. He's getting warm. Then he said to her, Please give me a little water to drink, for I am thirsty. So she opened a jug of milk and gave him a drink and covered him. Now he's got warm milk and he's warm again. You can see where this is leading. And he said to her, Stand at the door of the tent, and if any man comes and inquires of you, says, Is there any man here? You shall say, No. Then Jael, Heber's wife, took a tent peg and took a hammer in her hand and went softly to him and drove the peg into his temple. And it went down into the ground, for he was fast asleep and weary. And so he died. And then as Barak pursued Sisera, Jael came out to meet him and said to him, Come, I will show you the man whom you seek. And when he went into her tent, there lay Sisera dead with the peg in his temple. So on that day, God subdued Jabin, king of Canaan, in the presence of the children of Israel. And the hand of the children of Israel grew stronger and stronger against Jabin, king of Canaan, until they had destroyed Jabin, king of Canaan. After the song we're going to hear, they had 40 years of peace in that area. Okay? What else did she do? Well, you see the last point there on the screen. Chapter 5. She sang that beautiful song with Barak, a song of thanksgiving and praise of God for delivering them from Jabin. Very similar in its tone and what it addresses to that song of Moses and Miriam's reply. It's not filled with a lot of theology. It's filled with God is mighty and He gave the victory into our hands. The end of the song is even a little dark. If you look at verse 28, after talking about the fact that Sisera was killed by Jael, this song says, "And the mother of Sisera looked through the window and cried out through the lattice, 'Why is his chariot so long in coming? Why tarries the clatter of his chariots?'" So, in the middle of her song, she's going, and Sisera's mama is looking through her window at home saying, "Where's my boy? I don't hear the chariot coming." And his wisest ladies answered her and said, "Yes." She answered herself, "Are they not finding and dividing the spoil? To every man a girl or two? For Sisera, plunder of dyed garments, plunder of garments embroidered and dyed, 2 pieces of dyed embroidery for the neck of the looter." Oh, he's just collecting all of his loot and the plunder. They have won the battle, and they're taking their slaves, and they're taking their plunder. That's why he waits. And what had she just said? He's been killed by a woman, and brutally, and his mama doesn't know. It's kind of harsh. Consider a lot of the Psalms and that have that imprecatory aspect to them where they're crying out. For 20 years, he's been oppressing Israel. And you know, that doesn't mean he was just raising taxes, you understand. Okay? This is vengeance from the Lord. And Deborah and Barak are singing their joy at that deliverance and that vengeance. That's who she was, and that's all that we know that she did. What can we learn? Well, we can learn a lot, but the things we can focus on this evening are, it is good to know and reassuring that in the absence of male leadership, God's people are never without leaders. We talked about the fact that Deborah was a judge. And if you know your Bible, you know that she is an exception. Brethren, what do exceptions do? Exceptions prove the rules. God's plan from the very beginning has been through the door to the right, down that hallway, hon, if you're looking for it. Yeah. Just down the hall to the right. Nope, go out through the doors and then to the right. It has been God's plan from the beginning that there be male leadership, right? Man is the head of the household, and men are the priests, and men are the elders in the Lord's church today. It has been male leadership. And again, not because there's any greatness or lessness, because there are different roles. In the beginning, God created man first. Thus, man has the right and the responsibility of the firstborn. So we have different roles. But it's good to know, suddenly, in the kingdom of Israel, where we have Moses to Joshua to the male judges, and then there's this Deborah. And it's kind of interesting because it's different. So you think, that's interesting. And then what do we find? Then we find her encounter with Barak. And what do we see? Do we see virile male leadership? No. We seem to see a bit of cowardice or a lack of leadership. I'm not going to go fight unless you go with me. So it seems to be, her name means what? Bee? Seems to be a little sting. maybe a little prod to the fact of no male leadership in Israel. And we see that in other places, don't we? When Paul crossed over into Europe to begin his ministry there, who did he find at Philippi, down by the water, worshiping God? A bunch of men leading the way? No. Ladies gathered there, specifically Lydia. We see it in other places as well. That's comforting. Women can lead and be strong leaders. There are different roles. But brethren, there is more than enough work for all of us. There is so much to do in the kingdom. Raising up our children in the admonition of the Lord. And I don't mean just women, that's men and women doing that work. In the church, building everyone up. That goal of Christ-likeness. Striving for that purity that God demands. How's that going to happen? It's going to happen by men doing the roles that they have been assigned and women doing the roles they were assigned and doing them together. Because God is so good. As most of you know, my daughter, my oldest, was just married Friday. She is now going to be able, I'll tell you a quick story. Again, men and women are perfect for each other because men in general, right? We're different, men and women, and men have a certain ability to maybe be a little less emotional and focused and be more logical. We're a little less gullible, a little less trusting. But you take a man and a woman who is more emotionally stable, I would say, and able to deal with things that a man really struggles with. You put those two together as God planned, and there's nothing they can't overcome. They're perfect together. Okay? And the funny story is, after the wedding, I was tearing down the trellis they had in the back. And I went to Livy because I wanted to find out what wants to be done with this trellis. You know, Olivia bought it for the wedding. Do you want it? Are you going to take it home? And I said, Olivia, what do you want done with the trellis? And she went, ask Corey. And Jesse, the guy that officiated, his wife was right next to her, and she started cracking up, and she goes, isn't that great? She's seeing that joy again of a team working together. Brethren, there is so much to do. And we complement each other so well. And sadly, the world, unbelievers mostly, but even some people who claim to be believers, they always seem to want to try and pit men and women against each other. To say that the roles of God is somehow that male is oppressing the female. Or that, Paul, we've talked about that. The comments are made that Paul didn't like women. That's why he established those rules in the church. Well, obviously Paul didn't establish the rules. He didn't establish anything other than what God had said. When Paul says that a woman is not to teach a man with authority, what's his reason for that? Because that's what he wants? He says, no, because in the beginning, God created man first. Okay? So it's always been the same. So always trying to pit us against each other, and that's so sad. Because they'll bring up someone like Deborah and they'll go, see? There it is. Women can be leaders in the church. To which I say, amen. But not the elders. Why? Well, because we have requirements of what elders. You want to be an elder, you've got to be a husband of one wife. And that entails something, doesn't it? Yes, it does. They'll look at Phoebe and they'll say, well, look here. Here's a woman that Paul said they should listen to and they should help. Well, didn't say the first part, said they should help her. Yeah. Do you think that we don't think women can serve the church? And in many roles? Of course they can. But we've been studying in 1 Corinthians on Wednesdays, haven't we? And what did it teach us about worship and leadership in worship? What does it say? It said that if there are male tongue speakers and there's no interpreter, you should hush. If there's an interpreter, go ahead. It said if you're prophesying and someone else says, wait, I have a message, you should hush. But then what did it say about women? In the mixed assembly, you should hush. Why? It's about leadership. We have different roles. We're not adversarial. And it's sad when so many people try to make it that way. And I'll be honest, I've been affected by it in that I feel defensive at times when I have to talk about this, when I ought not. I've told you my background, playing football. I was a linebacker. I was neither a back nor was I one of the big uglies, okay? I didn't want to be either of them. I wasn't equipped to be either of them. I mean, I was ugly, but I wasn't big enough, right? Different roles. Does that mean that the quarterback is somehow superior to the linebacker? Not at all. Quarterbacks are the food of linebackers, natural food. No, it's different roles, and we play together in a team in order to succeed. God has designed us male and female, that we complement each other perfectly, that we love one another and be about His work. Deborah helps us to see that women can lead and do powerful things, and that women and men together, we can turn the word upside down, brethren. Therefore, over 3,000 years later, here we are. What are we going to do? We don't have King Jabin threatening us and oppressing us. But brethren, I hope you realize there are battles that we have to wage, and battles that we need to win with our children, with our families, with our brotherhood, trying to save our community, trying to save our nation. Seems just to pursue darkness. What will we do? Will we engage in that battle? We better do it male and female together. We better do it united. Because that's what Jesus said, right? He said the unity of His people would prove to the whole world that He had come from the Father. And what was the second one? And that if we love as He loved, the whole world would know we were His. So the question is always, what are you doing with this gift of life that you have? How will we spend the time of our life pursuing God and His will together more and more, or not? If you're not a Christian this evening, you stand separated from God by sin. Sin is that which is not of God, any thought, word, or deed that is not of God. Thus, God and not God, sin, cannot be together. All have sinned and fall short of the glory of God. You're not alone. But God loves us, and He has poured out His grace that all may come by faith and access that grace and be reconciled, washed clean, to begin a new life as a new creature on to everlasting life. If you've never put on Christ in baptism, why not this evening? Christians, baptized into Christ is rebirth. But then there's the whole life, as we talked about this morning in the sermon, the sanctification unto godliness until we receive that promised land. How are you doing on that walk? Is it more and more? Are you abounding? Or have you become distracted, discouraged? If you have, turn back. God hasn't changed. All of His promises stand. All you have to do is turn, and it'll be like you began all over again. If there's anything we can do to help you this evening, we'd ask that you come forward as together we stand and sing.